Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are happy to have you with us. And of course, we are sorry that you are here because your presence here indicates that you are dealing with the death of a loved one or loved ones. While we wish we could be together in person instead of on Zoom, we will try and create a warm and welcoming space as we invite you into our virtual living room. My name is Diane Halivni, Coordinator of Community Education and Support at JCFS Chicago, and I will serve as our host. I would like to start by thanking all of our wonderful presenters, Cantor David Berger and Nancy Wagner, as well as my JCFS colleagues, Lori, Tracy, and Marcia, for preparing their remarks tonight. We extend a special shout out to Nina Henry and Ann Luban, who are helping behind the scenes. We also extend our heartfelt appreciation to Scott Bauer, founder of the Lori S. Bauer Foundation for Sudden Loss, for your generous support of this program. The foundation was founded by Lori's friends and family in her honor to give help, healing, and hope to children and families that have suffered a sudden loss or crisis. Tonight, we will learn more about our grief. And as the writer Anna Quinlan reminds us, grief is discussed among those of us who recognize in one another a kindred chasm deep in the center of who we are. We acknowledge that we are here for ourselves and we are here for one another. Thank you again to Scott Bauer and the Lori S. Bauer Foundation for Sudden Loss for helping us build this beautiful support community. This evening, we have lots of support available for you, technical and emotional. And if you would like to connect with Nina Henry, you can chat her in the chat bar, and she will be able to reach out with you if you are seeking additional support. And lastly, we will be recording our presenters along with our PowerPoint slides. To maintain your privacy, we will stop recording the program when it is time for everyone to share their pictures. And now our plan for the evening. Lori will open the program with a meditation and bring us back to our mindfulness a bit later. Nancy will share her own experience of grieving for her husband, Alan, following his death this past April. Share a review of the typical elements of grief and how our grief is impacted by living during the pandemic. And Cantor Berger will share his thoughts with us about Jewish mourning rituals and the role of song in our path to healing as funeral practices in Shiva have become so different. Then we will turn the screen off, as the recording off, as we mentioned. You will share a photo of your loved ones with some musical accompaniment, and we will close our program with a special reading. We hope that by the end of our time together, you will feel more connected and supported, with some additional guidance to use along your grief journey. And now I would like to invite Miss Lori Garber Amram to begin the formal program. Lori is a licensed clinical social worker and certified Jewish mindfulness and meditation instructor. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you, Diane. And thank you all for coming together to support one another this evening. Taking a few moments to recall your loved one, close your eyes lightly to envision the person you love. What do you see? In your mind's eye, let yourself take in their image. Breathe, feeling your breath as it enters and flows from your body. Breathe with the memory of your loved one resting in your heart. Let's take 3 breaths silently all together, tracing the path of the inhale as it fills you and the emptying of the exhale. As you breathe, Recall the light that your loved one brought into your life. When you are ready, open your eyes, look at your photo, and take in their face. Then light a candle, bringing the light of your loved one's memory into our evening of support.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you for grounding us and for helping us feel more comfortable in our seats. I will now invite Dr. Nancy Wagner to join us. Nancy is the superintendent of River Trails School District 26 in Mount Prospect. She sadly lost her beloved husband, Alan, this past April. Nancy joined one of the grief support groups facilitated by JCFS Chicago and will share some aspects of her grief journey with us. Welcome, Nancy.
Let me tell you a little about my husband, Alan. Alan and I were married on Valentine's Day, 1993. Although there were ups and downs like any marriage, he was truly my best friend. He loved watching the Bears and the Cubs play, especially if they won, and he was a huge Bruce Springsteen fan. He made everyone laugh and made everyone feel important, like they were each his best friend. We'd been quarantined for about a month when he went into the hospital with an infection similar to one he had in November. The November illness resulted in a 4-day hospital stay with IV antibiotics, and he was as good as new. This is what I expected in April, but with COVID, I was unable to visit him in the hospital like I had in November. He was in a lot of pain, and he didn't feel like talking on the phone or texting. At least that's what the nurses told me. On Friday, April 17th, after 4 days in the hospital, I got a call about 3 in the morning telling me Alan had a heart attack and could not be revived. He was 51. My last text exchange with him included me telling him he better get better or I'd be really mad at him. I would have said something else had I known it was the last thing he would hear from me. I wished I could have been there to hold his hand and to say goodbye. I hope he wasn't scared at the end, and I hope he knew how much I loved him. I still feel guilty for this, even though rationally I know there's nothing I could do to change it. I was entirely unprepared for Alan's death. I don't think anyone is ever prepared. During grief in the past, I was able to rely on Jewish rituals for comfort. I never had to think about it, but a funeral and a shiva have always been givens. During COVID, I couldn't imagine what these rituals would be like. A funeral for the man with hundreds of close friends, but only include 10 people. He was the favorite uncle to more than 10 people. A Zoom shiva for the guy who hated Zoom. This left me feeling really empty. And being an optimist, I thought we could have a memorial service and a shiva in July. And when that couldn't happen in person, I decided I needed something for closure. A group of friends had purchased a tree to be planted in the park district close to my house. Little did they know that it was the same park where Alan played Little League as a child. We got special dispensation to take Alan's mom out of the assisted living facility, and his family and I met at the tree. I played Thunder Road by Springsteen, one of his favorites, said a prayer, invited family to tell stories, and we tied raffia ribbons on the tree. It wasn't what I wanted, but it did soothe my soul. If you're anything like me, you do a lot of things for other people. You're the one they call when they need someone to talk to, need to borrow something, are looking for advice, or need someone to do something for them. I mostly do it willingly, happy to serve others. When Alan died, I became the one who needed. Many people are uncomfortable with grief in general and don't know what to do. Being the first of my friend group to lose a spouse added to them not knowing what to do. Some of my close friends and family definitely were there for me. They did for me without asking and truly picked me up off the ground in those early weeks. However, I missed some of my other friends. And when I called friends I hadn't heard from, they shared that they were worried about saying the wrong thing or not knowing what to say, afraid of crying and upsetting me, and about being uncomfortable with their own grief. They worried that I might be having a good day, and if they asked me how I was doing, it might ruin my day. And after calling a friend who shared his concern of not wanting to say the wrong thing, it prompted me to send the following email. Greetings, everyone. It's been about 8 weeks without Alan in our lives. Many of you have been asking what you can do for me. I'm most grateful for those of you who've reached out in some way, a text, a call, email, picture of your dog, Facebook message, or card. I also know some of you are afraid to reach out to invade my privacy or because you're worried your emotions will upset me. I most worry about the months to come and the loneliness from missing my best friend. I'm hoping some of you can help me. You may know I'm not good at asking for help. I like to be the helper. All I'm asking is for a brief contact once a month for the rest of 2020. It could be a text that says, "What's up?" or "Thinking of you." It could be a call. It could be a coffee or a meal. I really hope those things are possible one day soon. The crazy organized person in me thinks this will work best with volunteering for a date, the same one each month. Any type of contact is appreciated. Nothing is too small to be meaningful. If this is too regimented for you, reach out whenever the mood strikes. Love to all of you, and thank you for loving me. My friends did sign up, and many of them are still calling, texting, or sending dog pics on their day of the month. Others have dropped off as times have become hectic, and some contact me on their own schedule. Most importantly, though, I'm regularly reminded that I'm not alone. And without letting them know what I really needed, I would have been a lot less likely to get it. I know each of us is different, and that what has helped me continue to get out of bed every day may or may not help you, but I thought I would share what's working for me with you tonight. Of course, regular contact with friends and family, virtually or in person, not hiding at home alone. Getting exercise every day, mostly walking outside. Right after my loss, I reached out to JCFS and was unable to get individual therapy as they had a waiting list, but they offered me one of their chaplains, and I have to thank Rabbi Suzanne Griffel for listening to me sob and helping me understand that the Allen-shaped hole in my heart will remain forever, and at the same time, I can have a beautiful life. I've been Zooming Friday night Shabbat services, and I was not one to regularly attend temple before the pandemic. The prayers and songs make me cry, but they leave me feeling a little lighter each week. And most importantly for me, the JCFS grief groups. The monthly drop-in that's held virtually at Temple Bethel has taught me about the common strands that run through all grief, along with learning what's working for others and giving myself grace. Even more than that group, the group for widows under 65 run by Marcia Reynes has truly brought me some peace. The women in that group are so wise, genuine, and loving. I'm so sorry we're all in the same situation, and they have truly made me stronger and ready to face the world on my own. So my journey of grief continues. I believe I will grieve the loss of my best friend, Alan, every day for the rest of my life. However, I am now able to find the joy in the little things and even catch myself smiling rather than crying sometimes when a memory of a good time pops in my head. And this is my wish to each of you listening tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Nancy, for teaching us so much. At this time, we call to the stage Tracy Kite to share her thoughts with us about typical grief reactions and how this pandemic experience is altering them. Tracy has been a social worker at JCFS for 26 years, and among her many jobs, she is also currently co-facilitating a monthly support group for those grieving a loss to suicide. You will receive much information with additional resources, lists of grief groups, and a bibliography via email in the coming days. Welcome, Tracy. You're muted. Sorry.
And look at that. Okay. Thanks, Diane. First of all, I want to thank Diane, and I want to thank Lori and Nancy for your beautiful words. So I talked to you tonight as a clinician and also someone who's experienced a lot of loved ones dying over the last decade. When Diane asked me to speak on this date, I shared with her that this is my season of grief. I've had a lot of losses that have all come around Thanksgiving. And this year in particular, I think because of COVID and all the separations, the yahrzeits have been especially painful. I often think of grief as the tax we pay for loving someone. The more love, the more grief. It can decrease our resentment towards the grief process because it comes on the heels of loving relationships. Grief, for me and everybody else I've ever met, is painful and it's exhausting. We want there to be a right way to grieve in the hope that it could be less painful and less exhausting. And I think in every grief group I've ever been in, whether I was leading it or I was a member, someone always asks, you know, am I doing it the right way? Or what's the next thing that I should be doing? And unfortunately, my experience is that there isn't necessarily a right way. When my late husband died, my kids and I were reading often a book called We're Going on a Bear Hunt. And there is a refrain in that book that completely for me typifies the experience of grief. We can't go over it. We can't go under it. Oh no, we've got to go through it. And that really is the way that we do grief. In our own ways and our own patterns, ups and downs and backwards and sideways and forwards. But you have to go through it. You have to feel it. You have to experience it. We don't get to take a pass. So depending on the timing or the death itself or your experience of it has been impacted by COVID. So either the death, the way Nancy talked about it, or you're grieving. We've had speakers in the past whose loved ones have died just before the shutdowns of COVID. But for all of us, grieving is hugely impacted by COVID because there are these overlaps. So I think about it like a Venn diagram, right? There are some things that are unique to COVID and there's some things that are unique to grieving, and then there's some areas that overlap. I think those places, especially that overlap, make it more intense. So COVID brought about a bunch of new experiences for us. One is that people suddenly were dying of something that we'd never heard of before. Now we feel like it's been here forever, but believe it or not, a year ago today, we knew nothing about it. Maybe some people in China did, but we didn't in the US yet. Nancy's experience highlights people who are unable to go to the hospital and be with their loved ones. And even if they are able to go, they're not able to be with them in the same way that they have been in the past. And the truth is that getting any medical care is just harder right now. So living with COVID is exhausting. Everything is harder. Living with grief is exhausting. I always tell people, it's the first thing I always tell people, is that grieving is the most exhausting thing I have ever done. And it continues to be, even as grief waves come years later. Everything we do is harder in grief, and everything during COVID, as far as I've been able to figure out, is harder because it just takes more thought and planning. Grief for me and most people I know brings what I call grief brain. It is that fogginess that allows you to walk into a room and have no idea how you got there, how you got home, where you put your keys or your cup of coffee or your glasses or anything else. And so grieving and COVID, where nothing is automatic, is just even more complicated. There's also this sort of double dose of reordering your life. So grief automatically leaves holes in your routine, whether it's calling your loved one daily or weekly or however often you are in touch with them. If you were the caregiver, it could mean that you've lost your entire job with their death. And COVID also has left all sorts of holes in our routines. Sometimes we've lost things that we don't miss, like commuting. But everybody's lost things that were just part of their normal routine of life. And that makes it confusing. Now we're supposed to be coming up with new routines because of COVID, but we can't necessarily remember what they are because we've got grief brain. So I think people who do not have grief brain are also walking out of their house only to turn around again to get a mask. But I think those people who are grieving are doing it more and more often. I also hear from people and have experienced that grief brings a lot of second guessing. There's always this sense of, I should be doing it different, better, worse. I'm not grieving hard enough. I'm grieving too much. There's always this second guessing of the way that we feel. And I think COVID brings enormous amounts of second guessing. Should I go there? Should I not go there? How close can I get? What guidance do I listen to? I think that the solution to second guessing is always self-compassion. It is remembering that we are doing the best that we can. I always think of Maya Angelou's quote, "When I know better, I will do better." So I will make decisions now based on the information that I have. And it is possible that in the future I will have different information and I will make different choices. But for right now, this is what I know and this is what I'm going to do. Another big piece of loss is the lack of physical contact, which is also so exacerbated by COVID. Grieving is lonely, and much of the time physical connection is really important. I think it's why hugs are so incredibly important after a loss, or really after any sort of painful experience. There's something about that visceral connection with another person. And now we have this illness in our midst that says that that connection could be dangerous and even life-threatening. And I think that makes it really, really hard. I think I understand people who have dogs and pets and all sorts of things. And I also encourage people, Nancy talked about walking every day, to do something to be in touch with your body, whether it's walking or taking a bath, whether it's even stroking your own cheek or rubbing your own shoulder, because maybe there isn't someone else to do that. But really sort of re-embodying ourselves, I think, is really important. I love that Nancy shared the list of what helps her. She talked about regular contact with friends and family and exercise and the support of a chaplain and a grief group and attending Shabbat services via Zoom. It's like the Jewish JCFS, Jewish community trifecta. I want to highlight 2 or 3 things in particular. The first is finding some way to express your grief. That could be with friends, that could be in a group, that could be through a journal, that could be through art, it could be through dance, some embodiment, some way to get that grief not just sitting in your body, but out in the world in some way. And the next is taking care of yourself physically. Sleeping, if you can. For some people, grief brings the gift of sleep, and for some people, it takes it away. And so if you are one of those people who cannot sleep, at least to get rest. Eating healthy foods at least some of the time. That doesn't mean that you're not supposed to pig out on ice cream or whatever it is that might bring you some comfort, but that we balance it with other things, that we are taking care of our bodies. Getting out of the house when you can manage it. It got a lot trickier for me once we got below 40. And getting some exercise. And when I say exercise, some days walking around the block or to the end of your driveway or to the end of your hallway might count as exercise. Again, self-compassion. I'm doing the best that I can. I also want to let people know that there are so many resources available in writing. There are a lot of books of guidance on pretty much anything, including how to create a minion. I have not yet seen one on creating a Zoom minion, but I suspect somebody has put it up on a website someplace. There are books on grieving that are specific to every situation. At the beginning of the grief process, most people aren't able to focus on books. There's just more attention than you can handle. But short poems or other readings, like the ones that we are sharing tonight, can really resonate. A list of resources, I think Diane mentioned already, will be sent to you after the program tonight. The list is a small taste of what is available. If you are having trouble finding something that resonates with you, please reach out to us at JCFS. We are inveterate readers and collectors of resources. So my experience of grief has always reminded me of waves, and I talk about my grief waves still. In the early days, those waves were 10 feet tall, and they could easily overpower me, and they came one after the other. I barely had time to get a breath in between them. Over time, so slowly that I didn't even notice at the time that there was improvement, they got smaller, and there was some space between them. Space to breathe, as Nancy mentioned, space to laugh, space to look around and see the world again. The waves come back. They can be triggered by something expected, like a birthday or a holiday or a yahrzeit. And sometimes they're triggered by something completely unexpected. Buying my kids their first cell phones, which my husband would have loved to do because it was buying something. I had no idea that was going to send me into a grief wave, and there it was. So the challenge, I think, is to recognize that it is a grief wave, because one of the things that grief does is makes us feel crazy. Something about grieving just makes us feel completely crazy. And so when we can name it as a grief wave, then we're not crazy, we're in a grief wave. And grief waves will eventually subside. So no matter how much it hurts in any grief wave, the pain will eventually lessen. Whatever you are feeling right now, you will not feel forever. So in the end, I think the challenge is to find some mix. We want to honor the grief and the memories now, and we need to pay attention to the here and now. We want to keep ourselves physically safe, and even in COVID, we need to maintain some human connection. So I wish you moments of light and lightness in this season of increased darkness, and faith that whatever you are feeling now will flow. Good night.
Thank you so much, Tracy, for sharing your personal journey as well as your professional expertise with us this evening. We now welcome to our stage and our virtual living room, Cantor David Berger, esteemed cantor at KAM Isaiah Israel in Hyde Park, the south side of Chicago. Cantor Berger will expand upon some of the themes we have been discussing and the ways that Jewish song and ritual and liturgy may bring us some additional measures of comfort. Welcome, Cantor Berger.
Good evening, everyone. This time has just been so endlessly complicated. Nothing is as it should be. And that's for everyone, whether we've lost someone or not. And then those of us who are walking this path find that all the doors that ought to be open in all the ways that we've always expected, as Nancy said earlier, the things that we thought we should have when tragedy strikes have just not been there. or have been there but not in a way that worked. I think of my congregation, the people who have, like many of you, had to say goodbye to loved ones without being there, or who've had funerals over Zoom, and all the ways that this kind of connection we're having now can feel nice and good, but at the end of a Zoom Shiva, you close your computer and you're sitting alone in a room. And I wanted to think about some of the pieces of Jewish mourning, because so much of the practice of Jewish mourning centers around being together with people. So I wanted to focus today, yes, on some songs and yes, on some pieces of liturgy, but also on a practice of Jewish mourning that you may not know that much about. It's not the one we talk about the most, but it's one that has really resonated for me. And it's one that I often think about in my relationship with my teachers and my family who are gone. There's a tradition that when you are mourning someone you love, that you study Mishnah. Now, not everyone here is an expert in rabbinic literature, but I'll tell you that Mishnah is the conversation around law from something like the year 200 of this era. And it's given not in long book forms, but in tiny little digestible pieces. And it's conversation. Rabbi this says that, Rabbi that says that. And our tradition tells us that as Mishnah expands into later kinds of rabbinic literature like the Talmud, you see these curiosities where it'll say Rabbi this says that and Rabbi that says that, but when you go back to your history, you realize those rabbis lived 500 years apart and never talked to each other. That conversation didn't happen in regular life. But it happened in a space where the Torah that we teach endures, and where conversations between people who are gone and people who are here are commonplace. And my belief is that this tradition of studying Mishnah after someone's left us is not to gain mitzvah points or some kind of other theological quandary, but actually about imagining the voice of that person you love in conversation with you as you learn this text together. So this is a morning practice you can do. In fact, is probably best done a little bit on your own. And it doesn't have to be Mishnah. What's great about Mishnah, I'll say in terms of the grief brain that we were just hearing about, is that it's tiny. Small, discrete little pieces, a sentence or two long. And what I find so beautiful is that you can really imagine in your discussion what that person would say. And you feel them inside you. You feel them inside you talking and thinking and reflecting and saying, that's wrong. And you say back to them, no, that's wrong. I know what's right. And you hear the whole conversation happening. What you realize is that their Torah is speaking through you. That you are continuing their Torah into that conversation that has gone on for generations. So this is a kind of mourning. Now, for a lot of us, Mishnah might not be the text, but there's so many other places where this, as a practice of grief, of a way to make sure you can hear that voice inside, could be reading the newspaper, could be reading a poem, could be opening a fabulous book that you read together and remembering what your loved one said about it. What did your husband think about that author? Maybe he hated them. Hear that. Learn that. Be with that voice of that person you love. Now, you have the words on the screen of the wonderful poem Eli Eli by Chana Senesh. You know, the real name of this poem is Halichala Caesarea, the walk to Caesarea. Chana Senesh, walking on the beach, was struck by the fact that the world keeps turning. These things should never end, she says. The world will keep spinning, the conversations keep going. Our loved ones' voices still echo in our ears and our hearts. Their Torah, their teachings still are with us. We're going to sing these words, this little poem. For me as a musician, by the way, this practice of studying, I often hear my teachers, some of whom have gone. I hear their voices, the harmonies they would have made, the counterpoint to the melody that they would have done, the way they would have played it on the piano or the guitar. I hear those voices. Join with me in singing. Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer leolam, achol ve'hayam, rishru shel hamayim, berak hashamayim, תפילת האדם החול והים רשרוש של המים ברק השמיים תפילת האדם. Let's sing it in English. O Lord, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of mankind. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of mankind. There's a lot of prayers to offer, a lot of texts that have given comfort forever. This little piece here from Psalm 23, it's the melody we opened with tonight. I walk in the valley of the shadow of death. And I will fear no evil. What does that mean? I won't be afraid. It's natural to be afraid. It's normal to be afraid. If you're not afraid, you're probably doing something wrong. What am I afraid of? In grief, I'm afraid of forgetting. But I know you're with me, so I know you won't let me forget. I know you'll keep that voice so strong in my head, the memories so strong in my heart, and even as some things fade, other things grow stronger. God, you are with me. I walk through this valley in shadow. And I'm afraid. I am afraid. But you're with me, so somehow I keep walking. We sing together. Gam ki eilech begeit sal mavet lo irara. Gam כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא, לא, לא ירא רע. לא, 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 לא ירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. לא, 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 לא ירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. This is the part where we get a little higher. We tell God, no, 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 I'm not going to fear. I walk through the valley. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא, לא, לא ירא רע. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא, לא, לא ירא רע. לא, no, 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 לא, 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 לא ירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. You're with me. לא, 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 לא ירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. I have one final piece of liturgy here, which is that every day we wake up and we have a new opportunity here. Our soul is returned to us. Tradition tells us that when you sleep, it's 1/60th of death. When you sleep, your soul leaves your body and ascends up and wants to stay up there, and somehow we manage to drag our soul back into ourselves, and we thank God every day that our soul stays with us. But we know that the other piece of that is that our soul partakes in eternity. Our soul is with the people we love. Our soul is hearing their Torah still. So we thank God every day. These are the first words spoken. And this is a different melody than some of you may know for this prayer. I'm not always ready in the morning for the regular Modeh ani lefane. I'm not always ready for that in the morning. It's too much. Here's something else. A slower something that feels more like the pace of walking. Walking through that valley, walking through our lives, walking through the world. If you know these words, join with me. Modeh ani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam, שחזרת בי נשמתי בחמלה. רבה אמונתך, מודה אני לפניך, מלך חי וקיים, שחזרת בי נשמתי בחמלה. רבה אמונתך. One more time. מודה אני לפניך, מלך חי וקיים, שחזרת בי נשמתי בחמלה. רבה אמונתך.
Thank you. Thank you, Cantor Berger. It is always a pleasure to learn and to sing with you. We invite back to center stage to begin, Lori, sorry. We invite Lori back to center stage as we begin the penultimate part of our program, a deeper focus on your loved one. We will pause now the recording and allow people to see each other and acknowledge the beautiful souls we are mourning. The final part of our program. with a closing poem written by Rabbi Karen Kadar. And it's featured in her book, Amen. Rabbi Kadar's poem will be read by Marcia Reynes, coordinator and clinical educator for bereavement support, who runs many of our groups. Welcome, Marcia. Wait, you're muted.
Thank you, Diane. I think the prayer that I'm going to read is not up on the screen right now. It's
Oh,
called The Valley. The valley of the shadow of death is a tender place. It is a place of questions and things unsaid, and grace and love and depth and sadness. My heart is open, my breath is gentle, I am tired and sleepless. So I sit a while by the still waters, and you are with me. God is with me, I shall not fear. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia.
thank you, Marcia. As we end our evening with some final thoughts, the first is that we hope this program has been helpful to you. As we mentioned, we will be sharing additional resources via email, including information about upcoming support groups, bibliography, and of course, an evaluation of our program. And we take our evaluation process seriously. So for those of you that wish to spend a few minutes and do it now, I'm going to put it in the chat. But if it will come in an email, and we really request that you take just 2-3 minutes to complete it, and we welcome your feedback. And to have you share with us what you might be looking for in the future. Our deepest thanks goes to the Lori S. Bauer Foundation for Sudden Loss and our partner Scott Bauer for supporting this evening's program. A big toda rabah. Thank you very much to our presenters, Nancy Wagner, Cantor David Berger, and my JCFS colleagues, Lori, Tracy, Marcia, Nina, and Anne, who all contributed to this program. In closing, we leave you with the gentle words of Rabbi Joshua Liebman and our thanks for walking this road with us. We wish you much nechama, much comfort. With that song and another song that I think the cantor is going to accompany us as we conclude our program, we wish you much nechama, much comfort in your time of grief among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Laila Tov. Good night.
Yeah. Ya nai 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 nai. Nai 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 nai. Ya nai 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 nai. Ya nai 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 nai. Ya nai 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 nai.
Good evening, everyone. May your journeys be quiet and peaceful tonight.
Thank you.